Okay, this is our third and final day on Greek myth. The focus will be on Thebes, but I'll tell several other stories too. I think there will be plenty to do. Thebes, I remind you, the two main cycles of Greek myth are the Theban cycle and the Argive, from Argos, Argive cycle. Okay, now the Theban cycle. Thebes was founded by a man named Cadmus, and Cadmus will appear in one of the most important plays. The myths are full of strange things about the sowing of seeds and warriors growing up out of the ground, the 7 aristocratic families of Thebes. Not very interesting, really. Cadmus had 4 daughters, and each of these daughters was involved in a drama of some kind. Oh boy, name of one of them. Well, okay, that's a good way to begin. The first, for our purposes, is Selene. Selene, S-E-L-E-N-E. But I've told her story already, I think. It involves the birth of Dionysus, how Zeus came to her. She made Zeus promise to grant her any wish. Zeus, very foolishly did so. It's another case of the gods looking very foolish. I'll get much more into this topic tomorrow when we begin the Odyssey. And it's a very important topic to me. But in most of the myths, most of the time, the gods look very foolish. Again, I'll deal with that tomorrow. Anyway, Zeus promises to give her anything she wants. She can't think of anything. Meanwhile, she is already pregnant. It only took one time for the gods. And then Hera went to work. Hera, jealous, shrewish wife, as she's depicted, unfairly, of course, because her husband, in the myths, is so promiscuous. That is, having many partners. Okay, so Hera goes to work and disguises herself as the maid, the nurse of Selene. What shall I do? Oh, what shall I ask for? Ask to see him in all his glory, says Hera in disguise. Oh, good idea. So when Zeus comes to her the next time, she asks to see him in all his glory. Well, that's like standing close to the Christian Godhead, or whatever you will. That is, the power is so vast, and should be so vast, that she will be immediately destroyed, which is what Hera wanted. So, he resists, but she makes him do so because he swore by the river Styx, S-T-Y-X. So he must do it. He appears to her on his chariot in all his splendor. She's immediately consumed. He reaches into the womb, grabs the fetus, the little embryo, slashes his own thigh, puts the fetus or embryo into his own thigh, sews it up, S-E-W-S, sews it up, and 9 months later, out pops Dionysus. Okay, there are the 2 stories. I won't tell the other one now, even if I have. Oh, boy, oh God. Here we go. Just thought of another very important one that we will tell today. Good. Probably. Oh, good. Plenty to talk about today. Okay, so in this case then, Dionysus is the only great god who is half mortal. His mother was Selene. On the other hand, technically he was born out of Zeus. His deity becomes established pretty soon. A second of the daughters of Cadmus, can't think of her name, but it's not very important, has a son named Actaeon. And this is good order because we're leading somewhere here. Good. Actaeon, young Actaeon, it's very interesting because Actaeon's parents were guilty of certain sexual transgressions, irregularities, and so forth. And so Actaeon, not too surprisingly, becomes a devotee of Artemis. Artemis is one of the three virgin goddesses, and all three are militantly virgin. Athena, Artemis, and Hestia, at least. I feel like maybe there's another. Anyway, that in itself is interesting, that 3 of the 14 gods, 3 of the 6 female, 7, I haven't counted them, 6 to 8 female goddesses are virgins themselves. This is quite a statement about Greek life, because the casual student of the Greeks is liable to form the impression that the Greeks were erotomaniacs, E-R-O-T-O, maniacs, that is, obsessed with sexual behavior. Not exactly. They respected virginity too, 3 of the goddesses. Okay. Actaeon becomes a devotee of Artemis and sworn virgin, hates the idea of sex. I'll tell another story in a minute about Hippolatus, the same thing. Now, Actaeon goes hunting. He is a passionate hunter, because that's what Artemis is too. And one day he's out in the woods and he accidentally stumbles into a stream scene, onto a stream scene where Artemis is bathing nude, and her maids are all bathing nude. The myth on the surface of it is baffling, because Artemis is furious, and Actaeon worships her. Actaeon is a good man and a worshipper, a passionate worshipper of Artemis. Artemis is furious and changes him to a stag, S-T-A-G, that is a male deer with antlers and so forth. And Actaeon's own dogs then attack him and tear him apart. What cruelty, we think. And Artemis is guilty of some cruelty in the Iphigenia story too, to get the wind to blow before they went to before the Greek expedition went to Troy. But Titian, T-I-T-I-A-N, the greatest of all painters in my opinion, greatest of all painters of myth by far, no comparison, no one comes close. One of the greatest religious painters, one of the greatest portrait painters. Titian is the greatest of all artists in my opinion. Anyway, Titian has a painting on this subject. It hangs in Edinburgh in Scotland, where a couple of his great ones hang. And in Titian's painting, this is one reason why he's such a great painter of myth, in my opinion. The painting, shall I show the painting? Okay, Titian has solved many problems here, and has, I think, a kind of profound mythological painting, because there's Actaeon, shocked, has pulled back a curtain. That's a problem, but a curtain. And it's a red curtain too. But if you look at Artemis's face, it's pretty clear. She's blushing and angry. And I don't think it's that she's angry that he has seen her nude body. His eyes are directed toward Actaeon's midsection, toward his abdomen. What is clear, and from Titian's interpretation, is that Actaeon is in a state of sexual excitement. And this makes Artemis angry, as it should. It should. And she changes him to a dog, and or a stag, and he's torn apart. So Titian here has offered one explanation of a myth that often has not been explained, that I know of. I don't know that Titian is responsible for this interpretation, but as far as I think maybe he is. Other Renaissance thinkers maybe, but there it is, a great explanation, a reasonable explanation for that puzzling myth. Okay, so that's 2 children now. 1, Dionysus, a god. 2, Actaeon. Now I'm going to digress for a second and tell a second story that's a little bit like the one I just told you about Actaeon. This one takes place, though, in Athens. In Athens, the king is Theseus, and Theseus is a hero. Excuse me. Athens has one hero, Theseus, Theseus. And because of the rise and power of Athens, the myths about Theseus tried to rival those of Heracles, making him a monster killer. But the better myths all show him to be a good, moderate, maybe even wise man. He was like a tyrant or king of Athens, and in the plays at least he ruled mostly wisely. But Euripides, whom I think I've mentioned several times, Euripides was a rebel, R-E-B-E-L, an intellectual rebel. He questioned everything, including even the myths of Theseus. Now remember, Euripides is competing with other playwrights for the first prize in the drama contest in Athens. No wonder Euripides won twice in about 28 years. Sophocles won 24 times first prize. 24 times first prize. Euripides won twice. Euripides was a rebel. He liked to defy and examine again and again. Okay, in the Hippolatus, as it's called, Theseus has remarried. Lots of stories about that I could tell too, and I could tell about the birth of Theseus too, but only if time allows some later time. Okay, now Theseus is a somewhat old man, 40, 45, 50. Let's say 45. And he has remarried a woman named Phaedra, P-H-A-E-D-R-A. Phaedra is from Crete, and oh my God, problems there too, but I'll leave that alone. Phaedra, in the play, becomes... Now, Theseus has a young son named Hippolatus, and once again, the father's erotic escapades, adventures, his promiscuity, has produced a son devoted to virginity and devoted to Artemis, just like Actaeon, the story I just told you. And so, whenever we see this, we can expect almost some problems. That is true, I think the Greeks thought. Any devoted, any person, any votary, that's the word, V-O-T-A-R-Y, votary of virginity, is likely to have some issues. As Americans say now, a great expression we use, issues. Issues means psychological problems. That the Greeks did assume, and okay. So, Hippolatus. Hippolatus is now at least 20 years old. He loves to hunt. He loves Artemis. He is a militant virgin. Okay. In the opening of the play, in the place of the prologue, which I think I've mentioned to you is awkward in Euripides, it's Aphrodite who speaks. And Aphrodite announces that she doesn't like Hippolatus because Hippolatus has not only devoted himself to virginity, but has said some terrible things about Aphrodite. Well, I guess Euripides is right. A person, a moderate person, and a person who is ascetic, A-S-C-E-T-I-C, can very well be devoted to virginity and take a vow of virginity. But if that person speaks badly about all sexual behavior, including reproduction, everything, marital sex and all that, the person has gone too far. even by any reasonable standards. So, in the play, basically what happens is Phaedra, the young bride, let's imagine her to be 20 to 25, half the age of Theseus. Phaedra conceives a passion for young Hippolatus, her stepson. Not good. She struggles. Phaedra is a decent human being, a good human being. She struggles mightily against this passion, but Aphrodite's behind it, according to Euripides, of course, and there's no winning. Finally, she resolves to tell him her passion and then maybe kill herself. She tells her passion, and he, outraged, disgusted, morally indignant, resolves that he will tell Dad. Now, the play is, Euripides is always interesting. Even in a somewhat crude framework like this, Euripides has produced a great play, because the psychology here is so interesting and so believable. The son, the self-righteous son, feels this need to tell Dad what really happened. Okay, and he fights against it and all that. Phaedra has a nurse. And the nurse is often crucial in the action, as in Medea. She's a little bit crucial. And the nurse then, that's it. The nurse tells Hippolytus about this passion that his stepmother has for him. Now, the nurse is a reasonable person, a commoner, and she thinks, well, maybe all this can work out okay. That is, the two young people can have a love affair, I guess. Theseus is an older person, in the Greek mind, not very interested in sexuality. Maybe this can work out. But Hippolytus, as I said, is outraged by this. So, what happens? Phaedra is shocked and humiliated, and she decides she's got to do something to try to save her own life, she thinks. So she tells Theseus that young Hippolytus made advances on her, that he proposed a sexual relationship to her. He is outraged at this. He, the promiscuous man himself. Now, Zeus has granted him, let's say Zeus has granted him 3 wishes. He has, I think he's already used 2 of them, I'm not sure. But in any case, he then, Poseidon has granted him these wishes. And he calls upon Poseidon to punish and destroy his own son, Hippolytus. Poseidon does this. Young Hippolytus is riding in a chariot along the beach. Out of the sea comes a huge wave, crushes him. It's a cruel death, actually. And Hippolytus, is lying on the beach, dying. His father comes to him, and Hippolytus tells him what has happened. I'm missing something. I haven't read it for many years. But the point is that young Hippolytus dies, but the father realizes what has really happened. Oh, that's right. Phaedra commits suicide. And I guess the nurse tells him, or she left a note to Theseus about the truth of the matter. So now, that's it. Then Theseus, feeling terrible, comes to try to comfort his son in the dying moment. And Hippolytus, in a Christ-like gesture, refuses to blame Phaedra, though he does blame Aphrodite. But Artemis, somewhere we are assured that Artemis will take some devotee of Aphrodite and crush him. The picture that emerges, as always, and this is a good introduction to the Bacchae, the great play of today that we're doing, by Euripides. because the picture that emerges in the religion, in the religious views, the views of the gods of Euripides, is pretty consistent. We're going to do 2 more great plays that show Euripides at his best in this matter. And what he seems to say of the gods is, the gods, of course, are much more powerful than we are. Our power is nothing compared with the gods. And the gods are immortal. They crush us easily, and they do. Their power is kind of, what do I mean? Whimsical. They use their power whimsically and arbitrarily. I mean, what is this about a goddess who punishes a young man in such a terrible way because he says some bad words about her? And this applies to our Christian God too. I mean, the overzealous who pick and choose their reading of the Old Testament and pick and choose about an angry God and the Decalogue, the 10 Commandments, and thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, and are horrified at something a human being might say about God. Excuse me, this is absurd. This is absurd. The great God of the universe, omnibenevolent too, has his feelings hurt, or his pride is wounded because some foolish mortal says something silly and stupid about him. It's too absurd. Euripides captures this, I think. And so in the end, the gods become these somewhat arbitrary and strange, but oh so powerful creatures who use their power arbitrarily on us in a way that mostly we don't understand. The gods are strange and unknown to us. Worship them if you will, but don't expect contact, don't expect to understand them. And all this is very important to me because basically it's my view too. So, in the end, that's what we get. Now I'm going to tell a second digression. The Hippolatus, Heracles, before I go back to Cadmus and Thebes, because it's so. This is a great play too, in many ways. Heracles, and it allows me to tell about Heracles. Heracles is his Greek name, remember. That name, by the way, is important because Herakles means glory of Hera. In all the myths, including this one that I'm about to tell you, he is depicted as being hated by Hera. Why? Well, if you know about his birth, Zeus basically raped Alcmene, his mother, who was married to a mortal man, another Leda and the Swan thing. 2 babies were born, the one from Zeus and the one from Amphitryon. Amphitryon is the mortal father. Okay, excuse me. This is wonderful, actually. Things are falling right into place here. Okay, so when Heracles is born, Hera hates him, the little baby, because of course he's a visible emblem of Zeus's infidelity, of Zeus's promiscuity. She can't punish Zeus, so she punishes the children and often the mothers. In this case, she didn't punish the mother. That's nice. Other cases, she does. But back to the name. Heracles grows up doing marvels. He's the strongest human being of all. He performs his 12 labors, the famous 12 labors, which he performed basically for his king, because he was cheated out of the throne when he was young by a trick. A man named Eurystheus, Eurystheus, T-H-E-S, T-H-E-U-S. Eurystheus was the king of Heracles. That's impossible. But Eurystheus assigned these impossible labors to Heracles in hopes of destroying him. Now, the point. The point is that his name, Heracles' name, Glory of Hera, I think amounts to this. If Hera had not persecuted Heracles, then no one would ever have heard of him. Hera is ironically responsible for the glory of Heracles. Again, she torments him, she puts him in danger, she assigns through her, he has these impossible tasks, he performs the tasks, result, his glory. Who is really responsible for his glory? Hera. This contains in it a picture that is almost a theodicy, a justification for evil, because according to one interpretation, in fact, John Hick is the most famous, I think, philosopher of religion, especially from the religious perspective of the past 30 years, British. According to John Hick adopts the words of Keats the poet, who was a genius in many ways, dead at 25. Okay, and Keats, in a letter to one of his brothers, I think, describes this world as a vale of soul making. Vale, valley, V-A-L-E, of soul making. That is, we come to this world, we suffer, of course, many suffer quickly and die, but those of us who suffer and live develop souls. And one thing for sure, and I think I would agree, the only way to develop a soul is to suffer a little bit. This is believable. So that's the purpose of suffering and evil. Not convincing at all. A dismal attempt to try to explain what in the end is totally unexplainable. The will of God. Again, digressing for a moment, anyone who even pretends to understand the will of God, or, in my opinion, or to see the hand of God at work in this world, is either a liar or a fool. You choose. A liar, because of course he and I and no one else does see the hand of God. We think we see the hand of God, especially when good things happen, but then it must be the hand of God when terrible things happen too. I mean, really terrible. Come on, we don't understand God's ways. Euripides is right. We don't understand God's reasons for doing things, God's modus operandi, God's methods. It's all a mystery. And once again, anyone who claims to see the hand of God, and in my opinion, that makes the Bible authors, I include the Bible authors, liars or fools. I include poets, most poets, under fools. Euripides. Now we've got this play. Heracles has completed his labors. It's his moment of glory. He returns to his family. This is his first family. His family in Thebes. His wife, oh my God, don't remember her name, but it'll come. And 2 sons, 3 sons. This is the Theban connection. Heracles has connections both with Thebes and with Argos. He was born in Argos, but many of the myths are situated in Thebes. Excuse me. Okay, so he is at his glory. But in the opening of the play, his wife, his sons, and his father, his mortal father, Amphitryon, have been captured by the tyrant of Thebes. God, what's his name? I don't remember. It doesn't matter. And he wants to kill them. This is a terrible moment, and who can save them? Well, no one could possibly save them except Heracles. But according to tradition, Heracles, in doing his 12th labor had to do with the capture of Cerberus, the 3-headed dog of hell, and he went to perform this labor. He had gone 3 years earlier, and he hadn't come back yet. People thought maybe even Heracles was dead. Okay, the first half of the play then, the first quarter of the play shows us this wicked villain who is a classical villain, and classical villains are a little bit funny. He's just going to destroy these people, apparently just for the hell of it, just to amuse himself. There are no strong reasons. Suddenly, Heracles appears. Oh my God! Just in a nick of time, as we say in English, just in the proper moment, he arrives. he is apprised of the situation, meaning he is informed about the situation, and he rescues them, defeats the bad guys, and rescues his family. Oh, what a great moment! And then suddenly, okay, got it. And then suddenly he is struck by madness, a terrible madness, because Hera sent madness. I don't remember the Greek word, but that name, madness, sent madness personified, capital M, to take possession of poor Heracles, and he's driven mad. And suddenly he turns his arrows on his own family. His mortal father is able to escape and hide, but he kills his wife and his sons. And then he passes out, falls unconscious. Now, was he aware of what he was doing? No, he was not. This seems to be Euripides, once again, saying that the gods do terrible, terrible things that it's impossible to justify. How can one justify this? Glory? No. In what way does this contribute to Heracles' glory? That he becomes mad, insane, and kills his own family. It's a terrible scene. Then the second half of the play, he wakes up gradually. Theseus, the great Theseus, has arrived from Athens. And in this play, Theseus is at his best. As he is at his best in the second Oedipus play, Oedipus at Colonus, he's at his noble, generous best. So Euripides can do that. If anything, the play is very flattering to Theseus and therefore to Athens. Okay, he arrives. Everyone thinks it best to tie Heracles up so that he can't harm others or even himself, especially when he sees what he has done. And Theseus is there too. So, the heroes of the second half of the play are Amphitryon, his mortal father, who is not his biological father, according to the silly myths, and Theseus. And they represent what is best in humanity. Generosity, kindness, forgiveness, mercy, huge magnanimity, big heart, magnanimity. Heracles wakes up. He's in an agony, of course, of guilt. Though this was not his fault. In the play, nothing was his fault here. In fact, what Hera has done is Hera has chosen the moment of his greatest glory. He has completed the 12 labors. By the way, Euripides rearranges all this, the chronology, because in the myths, he performs the labors partly to cleanse himself of the murder. In Euripides, he changes the order completely and makes this his moment of glory. He has already completed the labors, and he has rescued his family too. Wow, what a man! And right then, Hera strikes. So, kindness, love, and Heracles wants to kill himself, is in agony. But he is persuaded by Theseus and by his father Amphitryon to go to Athens with Theseus, to accept rites, R-I-T-E-S, of cleansing, to be purified, and the Greeks believed in this. And at the end of the play, off he goes to Athens. Well, this is kind of like two plays, but it's typical Euripides. That is, how do the gods look in this? Horrible, horrible. Euripides seems to make a statement, and he makes this statement in the next play that I'm about to tell you too. Not in the Hippolatus, though, but it's his most mature statement, I would say. And that statement is, what there is of goodness in the world comes from man. And when man is able to overcome his own lust and greed and insecurity and jealousy and the rest of our stupidities, we are capable of nobility, kindness, all those qualities. They don't come from the gods. In fact, they are qualities that the gods almost never show. That's what Euripides says. Okay. Now to the greatest of the plays, I think, the Bacchae. We're back in Thebes, dealing with a third of the children of Cadmus, who had a third daughter of the 4 daughters. The fourth one had problems too, with the gods and so forth. Very interesting. Okay. In the Bacchae, the situation is Thebes. Dionysus, who had gone to Asia, and Asia almost always meant Asia Minor, Turkey, but in this case the myth carried him all the way to India. Dionysus has been traveling around basically proselytizing, letting people know about this new god himself, and creating a kind of following. That in itself is embarrassing, but okay. And now he is fully accepted as an Olympian god. Okay, and now he is returning to his origin, to his home, the home of his birth, Thebes. I already told you the story of his birth and how his mother was consumed. Did I finish that? I'm not sure I finished that, so I better say it now. So Zeus appears. Oh yes, I told you, of course. And so Selene, the mother, is gone. She was consumed by ashes in that somewhat terrible way, though she was foolish too, certainly. Okay. Dionysus has reappeared, and he has brought with him his followers, the Maenads, M-A-E-N-A-D-S, and the Bacchae. Now the Bacchae are the chorus. Bacchae are the worshippers of Dionysus who accompany him. Generally they are mild and not very violent. The Maenads, M-A-E-N-A-D-S, are inspired, ecstatic, and capable of brutal cruelty followers of Dionysus. That is, they are the ones who worship him in ecstasy in the wilderness. They become filled with his spirit. They acquire this vast strength. This is historical, by the way. This is called orgiastic religion, and this is an extreme form, but it has appeared in many cultures historically. They become full of the sense of the god and acquire this vast power, and they attack animals, even bulls and lions, and tear them apart. Tear the animals apart, and then eat the raw flesh, because especially the bull, which was sacred to Dionysus. And call this Eucharist, because after all, the Eucharist is the eating of the body and blood of Christ, and in some Protestant sects, this is not symbolic, this is literal. That's where it comes from, partaking of. So, it's not so strange. Okay, now the Maenads then, who are these Maenads? Well, they are the women of Thebes, including, okay, time to meet the main character, Pentheus. Pentheus is the grandson of Cadmus, the son of Agave, A-G-A-V-E, or A-G-A-U-E, is spelled both ways. And she, when Dionysus appeared, rejected Dionysus' claim of divinity immediately. Nonsense. She, after all, what is she? She's a jealous sister who did not want to admit that her late deceased sister, Selene, had produced a god. Just a jealous sibling. So, to punish her, and to punish the other Theban women who had rejected his claims to divinity, Dionysus had inspired them with this madness, and they were Maenads living out in the wilderness. In this play, then, the ruler of Thebes is Pentheus. Pentheus is a young man. Only later do we learn how young, and that's key to the interpretation of the play, because the play has inspired a lot of discussion and is regarded as a mystery play, because it is confusing. But I think there's a pretty good explanation. I follow William Arrowsmith, who, it seems to me from what I've read of him, was a genius at interpretation of Greek myth in general. He also interpreted the Hercules play, the Heracles play that I just did. Okay, so these Maenads are out in the woods. The ruler of Thebes is Pentheus, young Pentheus, and Pentheus is presented as another one of these fiercely anti-sexual Puritans, basically Puritan. It's another dark Puritan myth. That is, these dark enemies of sexuality often hide, conceal within themselves terrible issues, terrible curiosities, terrible sexual aberrations, oddities, irregularities, almost every time in the Greek. Okay, Pentheus, now, Dionysus has arrived, and Dionysus is presented as a somewhat effeminate young man, 25, 30, but he's from Asia, and as in Medea, Euripides makes fun of the Greek picture of these Asians with their elegant clothing, their hedonistic ways, worship of pleasure, and the male's somewhat effeminacy. Too nice clothes, nice hair flowing down, probably nice jewelry, necklaces, things like that. Okay, so Pentheus, when Dionysus first appears, Pentheus says, "Arrest him." So the soldiers grab him fearfully, and Pentheus questions him, and then Pentheus orders him to be put into prison. Dionysus speaks mildly, gently. He hasn't done anything wrong after all, but Pentheus is suspicious and doesn't like what has happened to the women out there in the woods, and there are rumors about the women's strange sexual behavior out there. Strictly speaking, lesbian. But that's Mom out there. But remember this, because this is what happens in the play. Okay, so Dionysus is put into prison. Then comes this disturbing scene where Dionysus causes an earthquake that opens the prison gates. He walks out, of course, and Pentheus is crazy. He hallucinates. And he thinks he is following Dionysus, but he's really following a bull. And he hallucinates, and the disturbing thing is that we see that Dionysus is a god, all the gods could do this, who, so to speak, can get into one's head. Dionysus is a particularly internal god who works inside us, especially in our emotions. Aphrodite is another, I suppose. But Dionysus is much more psychological. He is, by my definition, the god of inspiration. Partly inspiration from wine, partly religious inspiration. His followers are ecstatic worshippers. This is true of none of the other gods, even Zeus. He is a religious, the god of religion almost. He's also the god of tragedy, of course. All the tragedies were performed in the theater under the auspices of the priest of Dionysus on festivals of Dionysus days. The plays, the tragedies, Greek tragedies, are all Dionysian. I'll try to explain why sometime, but it's an amazing thing. Okay, so Dionysus comes out of prison. Theseus has Pentheus has tried to hurt him, tried to capture him, but he should have understood by now that he is tampering with a very dangerous adversary here, and his folly is suicide to oppose this god. The god's power is so great and so terrible. Okay. By the way, I skipped a couple of scenes early. We get Cadmus and the great Tiresias. Now, Tiresias is the seer, S-E-E-R, of Thebes. He is infallible in his prophetic insight in Oedipus, the king, in Antigone, in Seven Against Thebes, in several of the plays. He is infallible. What he says is true. He is the great prophet of Greek myth. Calchas in the Trojan War, a secondary figure by far. Tiresias is a priest of Apollo. He's a blind man. He's always led around by a boy, and he gains his knowledge from the flight of birds. But how does he know? The boy describes the flight of the birds, and then he, Tiresias, interprets. Well, in this play, Euripides naughtily, naughty, N-A-U-G-H-T-Y, naughtily belittles Tiresias. He's always attacking somebody, the gods or some hero, like Theseus, and now he even attacks Tiresias. Nobody attacks Tiresias. I'll tell you about Tiresias, who makes his most famous appearance, maybe, that's not quite true, but one of his most famous, in Book 11 of the Odyssey, which will start tomorrow. All of this is fitting together beautifully. Okay, so Tiresias, early in the play, is now a very old man. Cadmus, the founder of Thebes, after all, is a very old man. Both of them dress up in their Dionysus costumes and are going out to dance and celebrate and welcome Dionysus. But their motives are very important to me. Cadmus, does Cadmus believe in the deity, the divinity of young Dionysus? No, that's nonsense. That's silly. Why is he doing this then? Because the divinity, the alleged divinity of Dionysus is good for the family glory. His motives then are purely prudential vanity. How about Cadmus? How about Tiresias? Now, Tiresias is, once again, a priest of Apollo. And where is Apollo's center of power? At Delphi, where the oracle of Apollo spoke, and Apollo was speaking, everyone thought, and everyone, Oedipus, everyone, went to Delphi to consult the oracle of Apollo. But when the when the new god arrived, Dionysus, this ecstatic god who was so different from the nothing in excess, know thyself god Apollo, the establishment, because that's what it was, it's just like the Vatican. The priests of Apollo at Delphi are just like the Vatican. And when, in the early 13th century, Pope Innocent III, instead of opposing St. Francis, another ecstatic, welcomed him and made him fit into the established religion, the Catholic Church, Christianity, it was a very good move, very clever. The same thing at Delphi. And Tiresias, Apollo's priest, represents the establishment at Delphi. The establishment at Delphi allowed Dionysus to be worshipped at Delphi during 3 months of the year, the winter months. Good move. That way, because otherwise to oppose this religion, which was a democratic religion, a religion of common people, and especially women, this would have been a very bad move. Instead, both of these establishments, it's a remarkable parallel historically, welcomed the threatening movement and thus absorbed it, and thus eliminated the threat. Now it was part of the establishment. Very clever. Okay, that's what Tiresias represents in this. He represents the prudential religious establishment, playing it safe, taking the safe and the prudent and even cunning sort of way. Does he worship, does he recognize the divinity of Dionysus? No. No. So, very interesting. Ecclesiastical politics at work in 5th century BCE. By the way, the date for our play is 406, the date of the death of Euripides. Euripides was about 78, I think, 76 or 78 at the time, 479, 73, and this was his dying play. And I think it's his best. It's wonderful. Okay, so the stage is set. Now Dionysus reappears for another interview with Pentheus. And this time they talk, and in their conversation, fascinating, the most important point, the climax, the turning point really of the play appears, because Dionysus says to Pentheus, would you like to see the women out there, the Maenads, see what they are up to, what they're doing? And a kind of a scary psychological moment as Pentheus says, yes, I would like to. Would you like to see your mother and what your mother is doing out there? Yes, I would like to. Well, this is disturbing, because what he wants to see is basically, he believes the rumors that all kinds of sexual aberrations, at least lesbian activity, are being performed out there, and he wants to see Mom? Whoa! Now, two ways of seeing this, but I think there's really only one. One, Dionysus has changed the personality of Pentheus. Two, Dionysus has simply released what was there already. And number two is certainly right. The harsh Puritan has tried to repress the his sexuality and his sexual curiosity especially, and his sexual aberrations, A-B-E-R-R-A. And he has released these from the dark Puritan. Okay, well, to do this, I'm going to have to dress you up like me. No problem. So then he dresses this very athletic, macho guy. That's what Pentheus is. He's a young macho Puritan. He dresses him up like a woman, in a robe, even gives him a kind of coronet, and suddenly this macho guy is transformed into an effeminate guy who's checking the length of his dress, just like the princess in Medea did yesterday. And then they walk through the streets of Thebes, and everybody sees it, and no one can believe it. Our young macho, what can I say? I'd like to think of a parallel here, but can't. Our young macho king, dressed as a woman, dancing through the streets, leading out of the city. The rest we hear about, of course, from a messenger, because we can't see action like this on the Greek stage. A messenger reports what happened out there. The two, the god and the young man, had gone out there. They had reached a point a little distant from where the women were. And the god had said, here, if you like, I'll give you a good view. And so, with superhuman force, of course, God's force, he pulls down a pine tree, and Pentheus climbs into the tree, and slowly he rights the tree up, and Pentheus can see the women there. And then Dionysus calls out, women of Thebes, this pervert, biente, this pervert is here to view your sacred rites. And the women, maddened, attack. Well, he's way up there in a tree. Of course, he can't go anywhere. They throw things at him, the sacred Theseus, which is stick basically, wand, but they can't reach him. And then, with superhuman force, ferocious, they tear at the roots of this tree until they bring that tree down. Imagine the strength, the hysterical emotion. They bring that tree down, and then they tear the young man apart. And leading this is Mom. And in a terrible moment, the messenger tells, Pentheus, now seeing what a fool he has been, and seeing the moment of his death before him, reaches out, Mother, Mother, I'm your son, don't do this terrible thing. Mother is insane and tears him apart, her own son. This is a terrible, terrible thing. Just now then, Cadmus has gone out of town and has brought back the body of his grandson, his late grandson. And Agawe, the mother, comes entering into town with other Maenads, carrying the head of her own son. Look, father, I've hunted the lion and I've caught the lion, and here's the lion, her own son. Terrible moment as Cadmus slowly brings her to recognize that this is not a lion. Is that a lion's mane? Oh no. Is that a lion's nose? Is that a lion's mouth? No. And gradually, gradually she sees the horror. She sees that she is holding her own son's head, whom she has killed and beheaded too. It's a terrible, terrible moment of recognition. And Cadmus, her father, his grandfather, brings this about with terrible compassion, just like Theseus and Amphitryon in the previous play. At the end, she, of course, is a broken woman. What has happened here? She has been punished in a terrible way for simply not recognizing this god. And it turns out, he barely has a beard. I think a good estimate is he's 17 years old. As a boy, surely a boy's vanity, a boy's sexual curiosity, all these things are pardonable. But the god did not pardon these things. Once again, Euripides is making a statement. Are the gods real? Yes, they are. Are they these figures whom we have created? No. They are brute force. Are they capable of kindness? Maybe, but we don't know. Are they capable of great cruelty? Well, the cruelty certainly happens, attributed to the gods or not. Euripides will not go that far, and I mean, his gods' actions are not the gods. I don't think he takes the gods seriously at all. They are these creatures whom we have created, and we attach more or less silly myths to them, or sometimes kind of profound myths, like the crucifixion, for example, or the atonement, if you will, but the crucifixion. But the gods are unknowable, very powerful, but the best qualities in this world are those of us human beings when we show compassion, forgiveness, mercy, magnanimity, and all these qualities, which are human qualities. That's Euripides. What a guy. Great, great man. I could talk for a couple more minutes about a couple other things, but it's like, okay. I'll tell this famous myth to complete our series, really. It's fitting. It's where we began, too. In Athens, there was a king, name doesn't matter. He had 2 daughters, and he was helped in the war by the king of Thrace, whose name was Tereus, T-E-R-E-U-S. And Tereus helped the king, don't remember, and the king, in gratitude, offered him the hand of one of his daughters, who was Procne. So off went Procne. Procne and Philomela are sisters, and they love each other very much. They're very attached. Off went Procne to faraway Thrace, cold, distant Thrace. Procne misses her sister a lot. Asks Tereus if at least sister can visit them. Tereus says yes. He will go to Athens and fetch Procne, fetch Philomela, and bring her back. On the way back, he arranges a trick, because apparently he lusts after Philomela. He arranges for a messenger to arrive and say, "Your wife is dead. Procne is dead." Tereus, that's terrible. Philomela, marry me. What can she do? Okay, she marries him. That is, they sleep together all the way. But when they get back to Thrace, he puts her in a house out in the woods, tears her tongue, has her tongue torn out so that she can't speak, and he keeps her there for his pleasures, weekend pleasures, let's say, because of course his wife is very much alive. Now, she, Philomela, no tongue, can't talk, but she weaves, and she weaves a long tapestry in which she tells the story of what happened. Very cunning. She gives the tapestry to an old woman who makes sure that Procne, her sister, receives it. Procne opens it up. Oh my God, my husband did that? My sister is still alive and here? Because of course he returned and said sister was dead. So she does a couple of things. First, she releases her sister, and second, she takes her own son, Itys, I-T-Y-S, her son by Tereus, kills him, chops him up, puts him into the stew. This is the third myth of this kind. Feeds him to her husband, his father. He eats, then of course she tells him what's happening. He is enraged out of his mind and pursues the two girls. The gods intervene, change Procne to a what bird? A lark? I guess a lark. And changes Philomela to to a, God, I can't think of the name of the bird. Let's say a lark, but it's a songless bird. Changes Philomela, who has no tongue, to a bird who has no song at all. Click, 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 something like that. Changes Procne to the beautiful but sorrowful nightingale. But in history, Ovid reversed these, so that the reason Philomela's name is much more beautiful. So she becomes historically the beautiful nightingale, although she has no tongue, and Procne the other. The end.